Hey there, Robert John Hadfield from Audiomover here again to talk about some classic vinyl. And the one that I have here today is these days is probably a little bit obscure. Back in the early 90s, these guys were, actually 80s into the early 90s, these guys were just huge. I mean, they were to the point that they were filling arenas. And you might remember the album Empire. They had a whole bunch of hits, like Jet City Woman, the song Empire. I mean, they're just a whole bunch of really big hits, MTV hits. You know, they were getting played constantly, and they were huge there for a while. And they had a really interesting career that had spanned up to that point because, you know, that was the first time when Empire came out, that was the first time that a lot of people had ever heard of this band, Queensryche. But for those of us that were, you know, kind of into the heavy metal world, the hard rock world, we'd known about them for a long, long time and had been following them for a while before that actually hit. And so I wanted to break this one out because this album, just called Queensryche, was their first release. And it's not, when they put it out, it was not under a big record company. It's really fascinating thinking about how these guys became popular because it was really blood, sweat, and tears what did it with these guys. And it's pretty fascinating the story that led up to this moment where they became this, you know, these massive rock stars. Because it was kind of unusual because this was a self-release. There's only 4 songs on here. And a lot of bands did this kind of thing. They would go into a studio, they'd record something, they'd pay a whole bunch of money to get an album pressed, you know, the artwork and the packaging and all this stuff. Then they'd take it to shows and try to sell it. You know, and it's hard to imagine that world because the world that we live in today, distribution of music is, I mean, it's nothing. I can record a song right now here in the studio and distribute it to the world, you know, 30 seconds after we finish it. And this was a big, much more work to do something like this. Well, Queensryche started out, well, let me flip it over so we can look at the other side and see the guys in the band. Michael Wilton, this guy right here, he kind of started the band, and then it wasn't long before he had all these 4 of these guys together. So we had Michael Wilton, Chris DeGarmo, Scott Rockenfeld, and Eddie Jackson. And these 4 guys had what was in essence, they were a metal cover band. They'd play Judas Priest, Iron Maiden, Black Sabbath, and the original name of the band was not Queensryche. The original name of the band was The Mob, and that's what they were starting to perform under. And they didn't have a singer. And here's Jeff Tate, who now is kind of a legendary hard rock heavy metal singer, but he actually didn't want to be in the band. He was singing for another band called, was it Babylon? I think it was called Babylon, and then they changed the name to Myth. But he was singing for that band. Well, these 4 guys were rehearsing constantly, you know, playing music. And they'd been doing all this, once again, all these cover tunes. And Jeff Tate, this guy just didn't want to be in a cover band. And so, you know, these guys, they were rehearsing and they started trying to write their own music. And so, you know, they're all working double shifts, they're working 2 jobs, practicing every night and doing everything they can to save up money and get to a point that they could go into a studio and record some music. Well, when they'd finished writing all these songs and they'd saved up enough money to go do it, they still didn't have a singer. And so Jeff Tate, you know, begged him to come in and sing for them and put this music down on this record. And which he did, came in and sang. And interestingly, The Lady Wore Black, this song, which probably is, I don't know, it might be the coolest thing on here. It's one of their best songs ever. I really like that song. It's a really cool song. They hadn't finished it before they went in the studio, and at least the words. So Jeff Tate ended up writing some of the words for that song while they were there. And if you listen to that song, there's a whistle at the beginning of it. Jeff Tate was just in the sound booth, getting ready for his vocal part to start, and he just started whistling, and so it was a total accident. He didn't intend for it to be in there, but they liked it, and so they left it on the track. So anyway, Jeff Tate goes back and he's singing with his other band, and these guys start trying to shop this album around. And it's hard to know exactly how it happened, but this thing started just taking off, which was so unusual for a local, basically a local band to put out their own record and to have it start really, really selling. I mean, because like I said, a lot of bands from that era would do this. They'd produce their own record and try to sell it and see what they could do. But of course, I mean, you go up to my record collection, I got a bunch of things like this that metal bands put out that went nowhere. But somehow the music was good, the performances were good, and it just started gaining attention. And so, they got to a point where a record company was ready to pick it up. And what the record company did, so this EMI America, which this would have not been on there. I don't have one of the first releases. It'd be interesting to see what they look like, but this would not have been there, and I'm sure the UPC symbol wouldn't have been there either. Because, but EMI America picked these guys up, and they just released this as is and put it out to the world. And it was after that I heard about these guys, because I had a friend that had heard about them. And it just was weird because, we didn't have the internet. And so I'm not even sure how this information got around. We're making phone calls and, you just, hey, did you ever hear of this band Queensryche? And so anyway, and then the band name. So this song, Queen of the Reich, the song is not named after the band is named after the song. So they originally were called The Mob. I think I said that a second ago. But that name was not available. They actually could call themselves The Mob, kind of off of the name Mob Rules from Black Sabbath, because they were big metal guys and they were playing they were a cover band. So they called themselves The Mob after Black Sabbath's Mob Rules. When that wasn't available, they decided to just call their band, name it after this one song, which was called Queen of the Reich, and so they just called themselves Queensryche. And then you can see the kind of the odd spelling that they did, and apparently they did that to not be associated with, the World War II things. Anyway, so they obviously Hitler and the Third Reich and what have you, and so they changed the name, and it's supposed to mean the word realm, sort of the Queen's realm. Then this was their packaging, their photo, and this thing ended up getting around so much. Oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. This ended up getting around, and a buddy of mine, I was over at his house, and he knew I was into heavy metal, and he was too. So he busted this out one day. He says, "You ever heard of these guys?" And I was like, "No, I've never heard of." And he goes, "You got to hear this." So he puts on Queen of the Reich. He puts the first song on. I go, I just was amazed. So next day, I'm at the record store buying the record. And so for a while, those of us that were into this stuff, this was all we had. And, this basically demo that this band had put out that had been now circulated around the world. Now, it didn't sell. I think it ended up selling like 500,000 copies. So it wasn't like enormous, but still, for a homegrown, self-produced, work double shifts to save up money to record it, to get that kind of sales out of this ultimately is kind of amazing. So we all kind of, we're kind of wondering what's happening, where are these guys, and then eventually we started hearing the buzz that a new album was going to come out and it was going to be called The Warning, and so a lot of us, we were so excited about that, and The Warning came out, and we all went nuts and bought it, and then of course the rest is history. They put a few albums out. And Operation Mindcrime, which some of you may have heard of, because they had a few hits off of that, and then of course Empire, when that one came out, that just blew up. And they had, and on that tour, it was interesting too, because on the Empire tour, they played the entire Operation Mindcrime. I'm not sure that was a great idea. I loved Mindcrime, but I didn't love every single thing on it. But they really wanted to make that statement. And so they thought this might be the only time we get to do this, and so they played that entire album. Anyway, I was a big fan of these guys, and of course at the time, we were all comparing them to Iron Maiden, because Jeff Tate had a little bit of a Bruce Dickinson sound in his voice, and so we kind of got that impression and felt like, yeah, this is kind of a Maiden, similar to Iron Maiden. So people that were Maiden fans, a lot of us kind of got into these guys because it had a little bit of that sound in it, at least the voice did. I mean, you see here, produced by Queensryche. Like I said, they just paid for this thing and did it themselves. Logo concept, Todd Rockenfeld. So Todd was one of the brothers of Scott here, and he's the one that came up with the logo. And then one of these little silly things that people would do back then, instead of saying all rights reserved, it says all rights reserved. So there you go. So anyway, this is it has some thank yous and other stuff there, but this was their self-titled release. And then, you know, as you can imagine, in a self-titled thing, there's really nothing in there to look at. But this was Queensryche's first. You know, we really don't call these things albums necessarily. They were more of an EP, if you're going to be technical about it, just because it only had the 4 songs. Yeah, real quick, just looking at those. Queen of the Reich was a great tune. They ended up having a music video for that. And it has this really Amazonian large woman in there that was the queen of the Reich in the video. Night Rider was a really cool song. Blinded was a cool song. Lady Wore Black was a cool song. They actually were all really solid songs. And you know, I've seen them in concert a few times. I haven't seen them in a while. I don't know if they do, but I mean, at the time, as I recall, they were playing Lady Wore Black still. It was such a cool song. Might have been playing Queen of the Reich too. I don't remember. But they just had some really good music. They were good songwriters. They had catchy, cool stuff as far as hard rock and heavy metal goes. And so that's one of the reasons they were able to move kind of into the mainstream and get it. By the time Empire came up, became so popular because they did have a really good songwriting sense. And they were good players too. I mean, these guys they weren't slouches. They were actually a really solid group of musicians. And it kind of, I started seeing this a little more like nerd metal, because if you ever listen to Jeff Tate talk and just listen to these guys, you get kind of a little more of an intellectual approach to everything that they did. And so I don't think nerd metal is a term, but it was something I thought of way back when, thinking this is kind of nerdy, yet heavy metal at the same time. Although that term now I've got, you know, I get in discussions with people, what does heavy metal even mean? Is this hard rock? Is this whatever? I'll make a video about that, I promise. One of these days we'll talk about that term and what it actually means these days, if it means anything anymore. Anyway, Queensryche. If you like these videos, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we appreciate all the feedback. Please leave comments if you have anything, other albums you want us to talk about. We've got thousands of these things, and if it wasn't obvious, I love talking about them, and I can go on for days and days talking about this stuff. I'm kind of in many ways a garbage pit of useless information about music. So, and also, if you have old audio and videotapes that you need to get converted to digital, and you probably do, or if you know somebody that does, like your mom or dad or brothers, sisters, you know, there's all these people that have their old videotapes from all the different things that happen in their life, and audio tapes of their piano recitals and grandma talking and all that other thing. Or if you're even part of a church, there's a lot of churches that have thousands of cassette tapes from years ago, old pastors that they want to get converted to digital. That's what we do at the studio. It's one of the things we do here at Audiomover. So go to audiomover.com and you can start an order there. And anyway, with that, have a fantastic day.